All right.
Ready to go?
Mhm.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. I call to order the special committee meeting of the Ways and Means Committee for March 25th. Roll call, please.
Chairman Sims.
Here.
Alderman Gould.
Here.
Alderwoman O'Neill.
Here.
Alderwoman Parker Tice.
Here.
Okay, great. Thank you. Item number 2 on the agenda is approval or amendment of the agenda. Are there any amendments to be made to tonight's agenda? All right, seeing none. Any objection to approving by acclamation? All right, it'll stand approved. Item number 3, we don't have any announcements, appointments, proclamations, or recognitions. Item number 4, a report of committee chair and an alderman. I don't have an announcement other than I thank everyone for taking the time to attend this special meeting so we can review the items on the agenda tonight. So that's no small thing. Your time is valuable. I appreciate you being here. Alderman Gould.
No report.
Alderwoman O'Neill.
Just that if our next meeting is April 1st, I will not be able to be present. I will actually be in the air during the meeting, so I can't connect. If that changes anything, I'm flexible other dates. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Alderwoman Parker Tice.
No report.
Item 5 on the agenda is the city administrator report. Item 5A is the American Rescue Plan Act update. Who is covering that for us?
That's me. Thank you, Alderwoman Sims. I'll be really brief. I believe that we all know that the American Rescue Plan Act was signed into law on March 11th. And this is the first time since COVID-19 began that all 19,000 municipal governments in the United States are entitled to a direct, non-competitive federal formula grant from the U.S. Treasury Department. We're told that the grants will be released in 2 tracks, half following the enactment and then half 12 months following the receipt of the first payment. So what we're doing right now is City Attorney and I are attending webinars that are being put on by the National League of Cities, by legal firms, labor firms, and accounting firms, so that we better understand the eligible expenditures, we understand the regulatory requirements and the restrictions. And in the interim, I'm asking department directors, and there's a lot of information out there, that they start to read up on that and begin the process of developing what they believe to be eligible expenditures. So at a later date, we'll compile all of that and bring it to Ways and Means for discussion. You know, initially I thought that April, we could start that in April, but I believe April is next week. So we're nowhere ready for that. So this might possibly be in May, and we may be requesting additional special meetings, a little bit of more of your time. So there will be information forthcoming. And so please look to the City Administrator Weekly Report for additional updates as we have them. So that's my report.
Thank you, Gola. Item number, let's see, I'm kind of flipping back and forth between, I don't have my iPad. I'm not seeing there are any questions on that, so I'll move on. Item 5B is the presentation of the compensation and benefits report. We've got Linda Higbee here with us tonight. Before we get started, I guess I wanted to add some structure. As Linda or Ms. Higbee gives her report, if the committee members have questions along the way, I'm open to you posing those questions to her. I suppose if it gets away from us, we'll revisit that. And then certainly I welcome questions at the end, as per usual, to the extent that there are other members of the board that are on who have questions. I will recognize you And then I guess finally staff, if there are any questions that they may have who are on, depending on how long we're running, I would recognize you. And if we don't get to, I want everyone to ask their questions. I think this is information that's important. So, you know, if we don't get it all done in one night, that this isn't the only shot, because I want to make sure the information is thoroughly reviewed. So with that, who would be, I'm ready to hand over the floor.
Linda, and I just so
Yeah,
that
if you're,
maybe Linda will introduce Darren.
okay, thanks. On my team tonight, I have with me Darren Hufty, and Darren's going to be running our slideshow. That'll allow me to focus specifically on your questions as they come through. But also, it's my understanding that everybody who's on this call right now, or at least in this committee, has had access to the first draft of the final report. So clearly what we're trying to do here is to sort of summarize a lot of information into the PowerPoint. So as we go through this, if you have questions, please do ask them as we go. If you're more the type that prefers to write them down and ask later, that's okay with me too, whichever way you want to go. And with that, Darren, let's get started.
All right.
I think somebody's got to give Darren the screen here.
Nope. I'm good.
There we go. She's good. Okay. So we always like to start these presentations with just looking at what it was you asked us to do. So what are our objectives? Okay, my screen looks a little weird, Darren.
Hold on.
Okay.
Is that better?
I'm always impatient. It's there now. Thank you. Kind of gives us what we're looking for. Okay, so as I said, we always kind of start these with what is it you ask us to do? And one of the things that we were asked to do this year that's unusual for you is that we were asked to look at optional philosophy strategies that would allow every employee to receive a pay increase. Because as many of you know, when we first did the study in 2014, you had some classifications where the incumbents were paid significantly over your comparator group. And as such, they have not been eligible for an increase in base for some time. We were asked to look at your comparators, looking at additions or deletions of comparators. Right now you have 14. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We also did that market survey that some of you are very familiar with. You had the opportunity to design that questionnaire to say, these are some very specific questions we want asked, and we did that for you as well. Things to remember as we start through this is that in 2014, we actually interviewed all of your employees and wrote their job descriptions or confirmed job descriptions. And that went both to the employee level and then up through their supervisors for approvals kind of thing. In 2020, Jason did a ton of that work internally. So the internal review was done, employees had an opportunity to look at it, supervisors looked at that information, and that job description is really critical to some of the information you're about to see, because position descriptions allow us to match on content, scope, and qualification. So all of those pieces are kind of rolled in when you look at a job description, and that's how your comparators looked at your descriptions and said, yes, we match, or no, we don't, at a certain level. Okay? Okay, I'm trying to watch the faces on the screen to see if I see questions in your face that I'm not hearing. Those objectives, obviously.
Well, if I could just interject, if someone does have a question on the committee, I'm hoping the raise your hand icon will work, or the benefit of the doubt, because I don't have a full screen. And so if you're waving and no one's recognizing you, it's not that I'm ignoring you. Just with that, please continue. Sorry.
Okay, that's all right. I'm trying to watch the same thing. Obviously, the study objective is to look at the competitive position of Brentwood relative to pay and benefits. There was a specific group of benefits we wanted to look at. Those were the ones that were more critical to you, or things that we had looked at earlier in a benefit survey that we wanted to double check and just see what was going on in that particular area. And then last but not least, we have an obligation to prepare a final report for you, looking at process, results, and recommendations. And as I said, many of you have had an opportunity to look at that first draft of the report. So we moved from objectives to sort of what are our deliverables to you? What did we promise to give you? It was a competitive review of your compensation compared to a comparator group that was selected and identified by the city. Recommend changes, structure, policy, design of pay programs based on what your current objectives were. And then the structured report, which you've already talked about in terms of a lot of detail there. So with that in mind, I kind of want to move first into compensation because that may be where we spend the bulk of our time. It has been historically. From a process review, here's kind of what I want us to do this evening. Look at that confirmation of comparators, who we looked at, why, the design of the surveys. Again, you had an opportunity to ask very specific questions. And we've already had one follow-on survey question that we went back to people with that we didn't have initially. We distributed the survey to comparators, obviously. That data collection and analysis, and this is a piece where I want us to spend just a little bit of time today, and if we want to put a timer on me, you could do that for this one. There has been some angst around standard deviation and application and why do we use it and that kind of thing. I want to spend some time there with you tonight, as well as just talking about what were the results of the survey. What did we really find out there in the marketplace for you? And then obviously we have some recommendations, and then you've got a final report. My objective this evening is if there's a different scenario you want looked at, that we walk away from this meeting with that so that we know where we're going. Okay, this is your list of comparators. These comparators are the same ones you used in 2014. The one comparator that has been removed from there is you did have the county was originally there, and we found over a couple of survey periods that there just weren't many matches, like one or two from that entire group. So that's why that one has been removed. When we look at this group of cities, what you have and what we're hoping for, and you may remember this for those of you who were around before, we always look at sort of the scope of services of the city, how they're managed, those kinds of things in order to say, do we have a good sample of cities for you? High on our list is, do you recruit from that city, or would you recruit from that city? Or do you lose people to that city? So it's that attraction and retention kind of thing, that recruitment piece that we look at for comparators. That's a primary driver. So with that in mind, we didn't really mix up your comparators this year. When we looked at them, they remain pretty stable. They're well-managed cities. In some cases, they're bigger than you in terms of number of employees. In some cases, you've got a few of them that are smaller than you. But again, you're getting some pretty significant matches from some of them. And so we kept those comparators. We kept the county out. The folks who have used the county are finding the same sort of frustrations, which is it's just really hard to get really good matches when you compare the jobs. Questions on comparators before we move? I'm trying to scan. Darren? Okay, let's move on then. I'm going to assume that you'll jump out at me if you need to on a question if I miss you. I want to talk about standard deviation because it comes up periodically for you. We kind of take it out and play with it and put it back for you. The definition is the easiest way to look at it, simplest definition of how a group of data spreads. Here's why it's used. It's absolutely the best practice from compensation standpoint. If pay is challenged, you have to be able to prove that you have removed any low or high bias if your ranges are ever challenged. That's the other reason it's used. And obviously, it's just simply the most reliable statistic out there when you come to putting ranges together. Standard deviation is important when you're picking I want to meet the market, I want to be at the 75th or the 85th percentile. If in your pay philosophy, and you're going to see this coming out in one of our models for you to look at tonight, if instead of using a range, what you look at is to say, I want to be the highest paid in the market, or I want to meet the highest payer in the market, then some of this can go away in terms of using a standard deviation because you've totally redefined what you're going to use as your marketplace. Okay, Darren. So I've done just a little bit of if you're visual as opposed to words, this sort of gives you the same idea of what a standard deviation is. You've got this included acceptance area. These are sort of fall within the norm, if you will. And then you have sort of the outliers, the really low or the really high. The reason standard deviation is so important and the reason it is used so often is if somebody has a really low number or a super high number, there can be all sorts of reasons for that. And the example I really like to use in this is that when you do city clerks, for example, they're probably the most interesting when you look at this information because they are so different in different cities that if you just use them, they're all city clerks and they're all doing a lot of similar stuff. But in some cities, they're a very valued position. And so they may be an outlier on the high side. But in other cities, they truly are treated more like a clerk. And so they're on the low side. So you wouldn't want to necessarily include either one. So that's really just a graphic representation of standard deviation and why it's used. Really not trying to make anybody a math expert as we go through this. This is just a really quick visual using Brentwood's comparators that how this really works. So if you have a 75th percentile, I've collected all that data under that column, then some are excluded because they're outside that norm. They're more than a standard deviation off. Others are on the low side. So if you're looking at that 75th percentile and we're looking at range maximums, I think this is really from a really old one of yours, but Frontenac sitting at 77, for example, would be low, and so it would be excluded. On the other hand, DePere at 84,200 roughly would be excluded on the high side. So again, what you're doing is coming through the normative data there. Highs and lows are being pulled out to come up with an average. Okay. Looking at it. All right, so I wanted to have one that was really personal because it sounds like, based on some of the questions I get, that some of this dialogue is all around a couple of fire-related positions. So what I had Darren do very quickly when we realized this question was coming up is to say, what happens if we look at, you just throw out the best practice of using standard deviation and say, hey, we'll just use it without that in there. This year, it would work in your favor in terms of having a higher maximum. The maximums are really what you're concerned with in this particular classification. In other years, that number might go down. So like in 2014, when we took this same look at it, it actually was higher using the standard deviation because you had a number of people with very low maximums that year. And as you're going to see later in the presentation, you've had some very significant change in ranges from some of your comparators this year. So just bear with me through this chart. I'll try not to be too wordy. But if I apply the standard deviation over where your ranges currently sit, your firefighter EMT is still going to have less than 3 matches. It's an internal decision where you place that position. This is a classification that has declined. Nobody's getting rid of these folks in any measure, but they're no longer hiring into that classification. So it's declining. Not many people have the classification, so it's harder. If you increase the number of comparators from the 14 you currently have, 13 you currently have now, and let's say you went up to 20, I probably still couldn't find 3 matches for you. It's just a classification that isn't rarely used. You have some others, a couple of others that we can talk about as well. The firefighter paramedic, just over last year, keeping your same philosophy, same everything. That range maximum is going to go up by $4,000, a little over $4,000. If you said, I'm not going to use the standard deviation, don't care that it's the best practice, here's the way we're going to do this. Without it, the firefighter EMT maximum will go up this year. It will go up $2,037. The interesting thing about that is it still does not generate increased eligibility for that group because they are still more than $2,000 above the range maximum. And the firefighter paramedic is about $1,000 more this year than if you use the one with the standard deviation. So it would be higher for that group for this year. In other years, it might be lower, or in future years, it might be lower with that. Have I confused everybody on standard deviation? So now we should just go talk about the real data. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody wave at me. So let's move forward, Darren. Okay, so here's what we did for you this year. And frequently in every year, we've done much of this. Everybody you have as a comparator participated. I cannot stress how important this is and how unusual it is. We had to wait a little bit for people to get back off some holidays, but every single participant completed your survey this year. Really unusual and absolutely phenomenal. Every year we provide you with what's the average within one standard deviation, what's the 75th percentile within one standard deviation. And then we've also generally provided you the 85th because it's something that you have looked at in the past. This year, we looked at for only the uniform group, which creates some angst for Brentwood, to meet the highest comparator maximum. To say, if you really want to give everyone in those classifications an increase, what philosophy would you need to follow in order to do that? We did not model that particular piece for anybody other than uniform. But we always give you this amount of data. We just have added that last piece this year, which is meeting the highest comparator maximum. Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Firefighter EMT Classification because it does present a great challenge for you, I think. There's only 3 comparators. Nobody's hiring. We talked about that earlier. You're higher than everybody but Maplewood. So although there are 3 people who match, 2 of the 3, you're already higher than they are for this classification. Maplewood uses ranges. They don't use steps. So again, the difference in a range and a step is that there's no defined time period to go to the maximum. So when you start, you get whatever increases are going for that city for that year. So some years it might be 0, some years it might be 3, some years it might be 5. You just don't know. There is a promotional opportunity into that higher classification if the incumbents want a higher income. But over the course of doing this study, working with Jason, one of the things we found out, and I think he was working with the department head there, is that this classification has been in existence for 15 years. No one has opted to go into that opportunity. And at this point, within the next 3 to 5 years, they're all retirement eligible in that classification. So I just want to point out that there is promotional opportunity, but in terms of, is it really a good use of city money, for example, to pay for them to go back and pick up the paramedic, even if they were willing to do that, you'd only have a short window of return, if you will, because of that retirement eligibility. No, and nobody's applied. I mean, that was, I think, probably the key thing that that Jason picked up over that period of time, is that the opportunity has long been there. It just hasn't been acted upon. Jason, you want to comment on that? Okay, we're going to move on from
Sorry, I was
IT.
muted there. No, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head. I think the thing is, you know, again, the time frame it would take for an EMT to become a paramedic is pretty extensive. When a lot of those EMTs were initially hired in, the thought process would be that they would ultimately transition into being a paramedic. And then as the leadership within the fire department has changed, the priorities have changed, and then that hasn't come to fruition. That's always something that's technically on the table. I think perhaps some of those individuals in those classifications may indicate that it's not feasible for them to do that. But from a practical standpoint, the opportunity is there.
Okay, so one of the very specific questions that we asked, and we looked at fire districts before when we were looking at this. In fire, we asked a very specific question in this survey, which was, do you use fire districts as a comparator for setting your ranges? That was our question. 1 out of the 8 said that they included fire district as a comparator, but then they get excluded because of the standard deviation, because they are so much higher than cities are, than the other cities are. So just to kind of give you that sense of what's really practical, if you will. And by and large, the comments that we got back is that fire districts are not a recruitment or retention issue for your comparator group. You don't try to recruit out of fire districts. And by and large, to get into a fire district, you've got to have some influence, if you will. And so sometimes the few that we've been able to track going from a city into a district is because they were on the district waiting list to begin with, and the city hired them. So they may have been with the city for a year or 3 years or whatever. And then when the position opened in the district, they moved over. So that's what we found out about fire districts. Questions on that? Again, I know that this question has come up before, and we actually went out and pulled data from fire districts for you one other time as well. Okay. All right, Darren. Okay, so let's talk about police a little bit. The biggest concern in police, I think, is that there's only 2 matches to the corporal role, Frontenac and Maryland Heights. We took a little piece today, and I'm going to go back to both of those and ask for their supervisory line or chain so that we'll have some more information for you there. 6 out of the 14 have a classification for police detective, but they all have the same pay range as a police officer. The survey that I said we went back out and did after we had completed your initial survey had to do with, for detectives, did you give any sort of stipend for that? And we did find that most of them have a stipend, some designated as clothing, some have some other stuff to it, and some other people just say it's just a stipend, and they don't classify what it can be used for. It ranges from $500 to $1,000, and you've got one outlier at $2,500. Is that right, Darren? Did I get my numbers right?
That is correct. That is correct. 3 of them,
Okay.
excuse me, 4 of them offer cell phone incentives or reimbursement or stipends, technically relevant to the cell phones. All the comparators except for 1 provide uniform or just an overall stipend.
So the other thing that was really interesting in your data this year, but not surprising, interesting but not surprising, when you think about what's going on in our world today for the police officers, you saw some very significant jumps over the most recent survey for you in terms of where those maximums were. You have Ellisville going up $15,000 on their maximum. DePere went up 8, and then Clayton went up 5. I mean, so you had some really significant jumps in maximum. Again, not necessarily surprising when you look at where our world is today. So you're going to see that information as we go on through this. Okay. We did some modeling. Let's talk about what that looks like, because I think this is really key, because what we're suggesting is, if in order to get every single person in your organization to be raise eligible this year, you're going to have a change in philosophy, especially on the uniform side. So to do that, we've looked at a couple of things. The first thing we looked at was just sticking with what you've always done, which is the 75th percentile with 1 standard deviation for maximum and minimum amongst comparators. So again, that the graph you looked at earlier, that's what that is. That's what you have historically done. We then went back and said, what if we just matched the highest maximum we could find for these jobs with your comparators? And we used the 75th percentile minimum. And again, all that piece is amongst there. So we went out and modeled that. As we looked at what happened to raise eligibility, the piece that we came up with that achieves your objective is to use to match the highest maximum found amongst your comparators. And then you have an option on the minimum versus using the 75th. And that's more of a cost issue in terms of what happens. So as you go back and forth, you'll be keeping that in the back of your mind, that it's sort of a cost issue. If you drop to the 75th percentile and the highest maximum, those ranges get broader, so it's a little more costly. So that's where we're going to be going next. Questions on the models? Okay. So let's talk about the one that really achieves everything you said you wanted in terms of people getting raises. 2020 ranges against a new range uses the highest minimum and the highest maximum. So in some cases, that highest maximum might belong to Maplewood, but the highest minimum might belong to Kirkwood. So it's not always the same city, and keep that in mind. And as I shift from job to job, that could be different too. So if I look at a police officer, I might be matching to one city to hit the highest max, but I might be matching to a different city to hit the highest minimum. But then when I went up, and let's say I looked at captain, I might be using 2 totally different cities in order to hit the highest maximum. So the range minimums are higher, depending on the classification, anywhere from 8.5, roughly 8.5 to 30%. So again, pretty big jumps depending on the classification. The maximums, much less, okay? Maximums could be as low as 2% in some classifications, 11.5 in others, like the police officer, for example. The new ranges have a smaller spread from minimum to maximum in general. So remember that we have ranges, and then we have how the step-to-step. So you've got a range spread, and then the step-to-step increases we have kept consistent for each classification. So lieutenants and captains, because the range is so much tighter or smaller, they have significantly lower increases step-to-step than other classifications. So again, to get you to where you want to go, you're kind of making some adjustments along the way. So that's the first model, and that gets you everything you have asked for, but it requires a change in philosophy. Okay, next up, Darren. So obviously you could use the 75th percentile minimum against the highest maximum. So what you see in here, the important piece that you're looking at here is that numbers begin to drop. So the minimums are higher, but they're only 3.5, 3.6 to 15.9, as opposed to all the way up to 30% based on the classification. The maximums are higher, but once again, you've got a difference in the range. And the spreads are higher and lower. So again, you've got a mixture going on there, depending on the position. So it's very position dependent as we look at these two. And then obviously you've got here's what we always do. 75th percent maximum and minimum. All ranges are going up, except for those that we can't match, and you've got to internally place, like that EMT role we talked about. We had 4 positions that had less than 3 responses once we pull the standard deviation out for those positions. And we just retained the 2020 ranges for those, because you get to decide from an internal perspective what kind of just difference you would like between roles where we can't match them to the marketplace with significant data. Range maximums are higher for 3 positions, and the spreads are lower for 3 positions. So again, you've got some, again, a mixture kind of going on based on the position itself. So let's talk about what that really looks like. If you're a visual, we talk about range spreads, which is not like the increase year over year. So I'm just going to walk you through the first one, which is the highest max, highest min, because the others flow from that. The range spread just talks about what's the difference between minimum to maximum. And then to know that we need to get somebody there in 7 steps, we can determine what the step-to-step increase needs to be, which is that far right column on your screen. So you can see that if you're looking at a firefighter EMT, to get step-to-step on that range spread, we need 5.6% increases step-to-step. On the fire captain, we only need 1.8 to hit market going step-to-step. But the range spread, if you will, is pretty significant. But the smallest range spread, if you look at it, is the fire lieutenant. And we've talked a little bit about how we might want to modify 7 steps back to something else a little later in the presentation. So all you're doing in looking at this piece is seeing that step-to-step percent increase is going to stay consistent for the role, if you will, but the range spread could be very different in terms of what you're trying to achieve year over year.
And an easy thing to look at to reference is if the minimum of the range increase is going up higher than the maximum of the range increase, then the range spread is narrowing. So the perfect example, that's fire lieutenant. The minimum going up 30% with the maximum only going up 2%. That narrows that range to a 9% spread from the minimum to the maximum.
Okay, so with that in mind, let's go take a look at what it would cost you to implement these 2 philosophies, or 3 different models, if you will. Next highest step, it's what's generally been used by Brentwood. You haven't just magically jumped to the same step they're currently on. Applying the new range by you moving the incumbent to the next step based on the step rate amount. So in that case, what happens is some people might get 0.6% in order to reach the next step, and somebody else might need 3.5% to reach the next step, depending on where they are currently. The next highest step was the next model, because we said we want everybody to have at least 2.5%, for example. So in looking at that, we simply applied that and said, if that first move doesn't get you there, what would it cost you to make sure everybody got at least 2.5? Now, by everybody getting at least 2.5, you still don't have everybody getting exactly the same amount, because some people are getting 1.4 in order to reach 2.5. Other people might need 6% to get there. And then the same step we always look at for you, because if you had all the money in the world, this might be the way you would want to go, which is simply saying, if I'm on step 6, I'm moving you to the new step 6 in whatever the new philosophy is. So that's sort of how it would be implemented. Okay, so really the bottom line here is what you're looking at is that box on the bottom. And that tells you, if you're looking at it, that applying what Brentwood generally has done, that next highest step, you could actually move to the highest max for this particular group. And remember, we only applied this to uniform. We did not apply it to your core group of employees. Would cost you $78,000. If you then adjusted and said they've got to go at least 2.5%, that number is going to jump big to 145. But if you went to the same step, you've got an annualized increase cost. It's going to be with you forever and ever, or most of the time, for $238,305. So again, some pretty significant differences depending on how you decide to implement any of these scenarios. And that's really what we wanted to show you, is you've got some decisions to make, some options and some opportunity. But I think clearly the biggest piece for me is that even in your traditional 75th percentile and applying the new ranges to people, most individuals are raise eligible this year, not all. So you can't achieve your objective by sticking to your same one. So that's why we were looking at the other philosophies. Okay, Darren. I'm still looking for waiver. Just wave your hand at me. I can see most of you on the side of my screen. So here's kind of the pay philosophy difference between the highest, the 75th updated, and then the current. I really want you to just have a sense of the dollars aren't that big if you're looking at it. The biggest change occurs to folks like the firefighter EMT, where if you elect to match the highest person in the marketplace, those individuals become raise eligible in that model, where they are not in any other model that you look at. So that's the scenario. When you look at some of the others, you're looking at a current range maximum. Let's just go pick on the captain down at the bottom of the page. The current is 100,218. So you've got a range that's already in pretty good shape. If you match the maximum in the market, it's 102, 109. So again, a pretty negligible cost by having that philosophy change. But if you want to go up and look at police officer or firefighter EMT, then those numbers become pretty big in terms of changing your philosophy from where you are currently. Questions? I know data is data, but I know you guys have had an opportunity to kind of dig into this in that report as well.
I have a question. This is Alderman.
Sure.
We have not talked about an across-the-board COLA. I had sent questions to BOLA and asked if that had been considered. If we were to do that, it could be a one-time distribution, which would give everyone some movement upward. I'm having a little difficulty of saying we need to match the highest maximum. I don't think that was ever Brentwood's intent. But I do understand that to get raises, this is what is necessary. But a COLA could change that. Could you address the COLA issue?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about COLA versus market-based pay. COLAs aren't really used very often right now. And the reason is because in some years, COLA goes backward, and we never want to have to take money away from employees. Another reason this year is we can look at cities, for example, when we look at what you need to do in order to keep pace with your comparators, we know what you need to do by classification. COLA right now is running 1 to 1.3%. So it's pretty minimal compared to what your employees have been getting on a step-to-step raise. So you have a couple of things. First of all, it's not market-based. And secondly, it leaves you this year short, but in future years, if you decide to adopt a COLA philosophy, could put you in a position of needing to move backwards or giving zero increase because COLA didn't move, for example, but the market did for some positions, and you're going to want to keep up with that. And by and large, when you look at how positions move, COLA is sort of embedded into that. It just lags. So if you looked at COLA and you looked at the growth in pay over time, you're going to see that those lines are separate. They aren't even fairly close together. And the majority of the time, COLA lags where positions move. So you would find yourself very quickly in a non-competitive position if you gave COLA. It also doesn't work well with steps, by the way.
Ms. Higby, could you, I of course know exactly what you're talking about, but for our YouTube audience, just give a brief description of what COLA is? Like just, you know, Reader's
Oh,
Digest.
I'm sorry. Sure, Reader's Digest version. COLA stands for cost of living increase, and it is a market basket of goods. And what is currently being used by those few who use COLA, and it's typically almost always in a unionized environment in today's market, is a modified basket of goods. Because initially they were looking at everything, and then they came back and said, people don't buy cars every year, people don't buy houses every year, all of that kind of thing. And so they began to pull pieces out of that market basket to come up with that modified COLA, which is what's used occasionally in manufacturing now to give raises. And so that's really the intent. It was initially, probably 30, 40 years ago, was really meant to measure growth. But what they found with all the surveys coming out with, you know, how many raises are being given and for what, it just doesn't align very well to how positions are valued in the marketplace.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
More questions? That was a good one. Okay. So pay philosophy, you've got some questions going on. So here's the piece that I think is really important to be focused on. Sorry, Darren. When we're looking at where you sit today, you have 5 firefighter EMTs, for example, that are at or above range maximum. If you keep your current philosophy, you still got 5 at or above maximum, and they're not raise eligible. Using the highest max 75th min, you still got the same issue. Same thing with highest max highest min. That's just a classification of folks who historically you have placed at a higher rate than the market. And so they still haven't caught up, even if you match the highest in the marketplace. Firefighter, paramedic, you've got 2 who are there, so not many right now. You've got 1 that would remain with the update to the ranges, and you would not have any in those last 2 classifications. So if you change your philosophy, lots of change goes on, and well, not lots, 1 person or 2 people. So the real impact is there. Police officer, police detective, you have 5. If you keep your current philosophy, you still got 5. Either of the other 2 using the highest, you drop down to 1 person who's still at max. And that's after they get their raise on that chart. Your police corporals, again, this is a classification that not many people have. I think we had 2 folks who could match to corporal. You have 4 people. So again, it lines up exactly like your firefighter EMTs. Fire lieutenant, you have 1. You've got some folks that would then be added to that range this year, so that after they get their raise, you've got some people who are going to be bumping that max because there wasn't much movement in that job classification. The police sergeant, again, same thing happens on those first 2, but then look at what happens when you hit that highest max. It drops to 1, and then it drops off totally. So again, what you're seeing is with that shift in philosophy, more people are raise eligible, but I want you to keep in mind that the decision you make around that isn't a short-term decision, because once you build that into base, it builds on itself into the future years. And then you've got the same issue with fire captains. You can see that as it goes across. But by and large, you go from having 25 people in this uniform classification, it drops or grows to 26 with the modification because you had some ranges that didn't move. And then you've got the highest max where it can drop to 16 or 10, depending on which option you chose.
Yeah, this is
Okay.
you had mentioned that you had you had looked at or considered an 85th percentile, but we're not seeing any of that reflected in this. Are we to just assume that it would fall somewhere in between the 75th and the maximums, or, I'm curious on how that would.
We couldn't, yeah, working with the 85th, we could never get you to the point where every person got a raise. And that was one of the objectives. So the 85th would certainly improve the pieces, but it doesn't get you to the point where all of your employees get a raise. Unfortunately, the only model that can get you there, which was one of the objectives we were given, was if you go to meet, not exceed it, but meet the highest maximum in the marketplace. And again, we only applied this to uniform.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sure. So we kind of looked at that implication of what's going on. To get everybody to raise eligible, you're going to have to change your philosophy. I can't get you there. Even if we just sort of say, I don't care about best practice, we're just going to use the average at the 75th or the average at the 85th, it's still not going to give everybody a raise. So the concern is that even with some of those, you have a lot of people at 7. So depending on which philosophy you use and then which implementation strategy, you could have people who are raise eligible this year, but unless your comparators, again, bump up their ranges next year, you'd be back in that same position because they wouldn't be range eligible in 2022, 23 kind of thing. So for what's there. That's sort of the whole point of the slide is as we get through there, what are we really trying to achieve? And I know that somebody had mentioned that you may want to take and just give an across the board lump sum payment, if you will, sort of an acknowledgement of, boy, COVID's been a really rough year kind of thing. And you certainly could do that if it, again, that would have to go through your attorney in terms of providing a lump sum so that everybody got a raise. But that sort of gets you back into the place that we've discussed before where you don't want to give lump sum merits to those who are at or above range maximum, which is how many of your comparators are handling people who are bumping the top of the range. But that's a pretty big change for you guys, and it's one that we sort of beat that horse a lot in prior years.
Okay, can I ask about, this is Nancy, can I ask about that because I wasn't
Sure.
around in prior years. So what's the rationale for not giving a lump sum to the people who are at the max rather than changing the max? Just sort of talk me through that just so I...
Okay, let me talk you through how it works, okay? Because it's really a very, it is considered a best practice, both within cities as well as within industry in general.
Because that's what I'm
basically the way that, yeah, okay, so you know how basically the way the lump sum merits work is that if I achieve the top of my range, the range doesn't change, everybody's getting a 3%, I might get 1.5%. Or I might get 3%, but it may be of the midpoint of a range or something like that. Each city and each industry does it a little differently. But by and large, for all those firefighter EMTs, for example, they wouldn't be getting anything new into their base, but they would be handed a one-time check each year until their range changed of that percentage. Generally, it's not of the base pay. People do it differently. Base pay, where they currently are right now, or the mid-step of a range, because you're looking for the market average for that. Historically, Brentwood has not done that. You have other cities in your comparator group who do, but each city attorney sort of interprets those rules differently. Some look at that and say it's a lump sum merit. Others say it's a bonus and you don't give bonuses. So that the argument seems to center around that. And I know that in one of my discussions with Bola, I had asked that she kick that around with your city attorney again, because it basically, they have to be comfortable with that, and not every city uses the same city attorney.
Thank you for talking through that.
Does that get you there? Okay.
That was going to be
Okay.
my
So, yeah, so if you were asking me to make a recommendation to achieve your initial goal for me, that would have been it. But having already beat that horse till it was dead. I didn't put it back in this piece. But it certainly is an option that other cities in your comparator group are using.
That I didn't know it was
Okay, Darren.
a dead horse that had been beaten, because that's what I have been
Sorry.
involved with in
Sorry.
other similar studies. And so I'm like, oh, well, why aren't we doing that?
I do have really colorful stuff. I just figure when we've kicked something around a lot and then not successful in getting buy-in, that it's dead. Okay, let's move on, Darren.
Okay, well, can I interrupt a moment? Why does
Sure.
it have to be dead? Is there are those of us who are newer to this, obviously weren't familiar with that. If we think it's a viable consideration, why not? Why does it have to be dead?
I think you, historically, you have gone with your city attorney's vote. It hasn't necessarily been the people in your role or the people on your council who have not been in favor of it, because most of them work in industry and it's been around for a long time as a way of doing that. So I think there are, that's why I asked BOLA to recheck with the city attorney to see if there was any movement there, if you will, because it is a much easier way to do what you're trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy to ask Kevin O'Keefe to weigh in again after this meeting. I'll search. I'm sure he provided a legal opinion in writing to the board. I think his opinion is based on his interpretation of state statute. So we can revisit that and present that to the committee again.
All right, so I think you have some decisions to make with respect to uniform, and these are different. I promise we'll get through the next group faster. I'm sorry to be slow with this, but I think to achieve your objective, if lump sum merits are still not viable for you, you really have to change your pay philosophy. And the only change of that pay philosophy that allows everybody to get a raise, at least this year, is to meet the highest maximum in your comparator marketplace. That's the only model we could come up with that achieved that objective if you aren't willing to do lump sum merits. I think obviously you have two key positions that I think you have to make decisions on. Firefighter EMT, what's the rationale for increasing the range above the classification? If you're already paying more than $2,000 above the max found in the marketplace, if you will, or the average found in the marketplace, it's not a recruitment issue. Nobody's recruiting into these roles. It's not a retention issue. Most of the people are 3 to 5 years away. What do you want to do? So again, there is some implementation strategy kinds of stuff. And if you only have a few people in this role, I have known cities that would say, you know what, these guys are going to be retiring. Let's help build that retirement fund. Whatever you choose to do, I just want you to think of it in terms of a long-term decision, not a short-term decision. You're not going to be hiring into the role. So I guess my bottom line is don't make a decision based around a couple of classifications that may not be with you long-term. Okay. All right, so here's what we did in the non-uniform process, just so you know. These are what we call the core positions. They're not uniform. We updated your 12-step pay ranges by 3%. That mirrored the market. We had a couple of positions that had to be moved because the market moved more than 3%, but by and large updated the ranges 3%. Reviewed the positions for internal equity. We made a couple of adjustments for internal equity just to see where they were. Using the 75th percentile, your old strategy, aligned the positions to 2021, you're in good shape. Performed modeling on 2 cost models. We only did 2 on this particular group because keeping the 75th, everybody got a raise. So it wasn't like you really needed a giant change in this particular area to achieve your objective. We looked at the next highest step, which is how you have historically implemented. And then we adjusted the next highest step if the increase was lower than 3%. So we just looked at a couple of implementation strategies. Your current philosophy works. The biggest decision you'll have to make if you decide to go with meeting the highest in the marketplace is, are you comfortable with having one set of philosophy for public safety and another for everybody else in your workforce. Okay, non-uniform cost comparison. 63,000 going to the next highest step. That's traditionally how you've implemented. Gives you 2.1% sort of adjustment to your budget, if you will. If you look at that, if they don't get 2.5, how much does it jump? As you can see, it jumps a lot because some people only need $30 to reach that 2.5, but other people need a lot more. So it jumps up to about 4.1. So by and large, budgets this year are ranging from 0 to 3, to give you a sense when we talk to your comparator group. That's sort of what they anticipate. You've got some people who are at 0 who are hoping, but not hopeful, if that helps, when we talk to them. So here's kind of what happens to those. When you look at where they currently sit today, you got 8 people above max. Before the modeling, you'd have 9. When we move into the next step, you've got 0 people at max. Same thing for the adjusted step. So again, what this really shows you is that you've got 63% of your population in steps 1 through 5. So they've got a lot of growing room. And you've got, 5 people in steps 11 and 12. So you've got 5 people that over time would top out in their range. So that just tells you that Jason's been doing a lot of hiring in these particular roles. So again, this just shows you by step how many people are there and what percentage of the population it is. But clearly what you can see is a pretty minor slice of people in steps 11 and 12, which are people that then would tap out or max out, if you will, if ranges aren't adjusted in the next couple of years. So overall, this group is in good shape. You don't have to look at a change in philosophy, any of that kind of thing. It certainly, would help in future years for those 5 people coming up if you could adopt a lump sum merit kind of philosophy. But we did not consider that. We didn't see any need at all to go back and model hitting the highest piece for this particular group of folks. So that's what we did. Okay, so here's what it looks like for non-uniform. Continue your same philosophy, 75th of your comparator group, next highest step and adjusted step, no incumbents over the maximum. 3 incumbents will then go into a final step after the adjustment in 2021. So when you look at making your adjustment this year, you got 3 people who are going to be bumping the top next year if the range doesn't change. And we don't know that till we look at the market. You have 2 additional ones who will reach it the next year out. So that's kind of where you are. So these people are in pretty good shape, these incumbents, if you will, in terms of they're getting raises. You've adjusted to market and you have no need to adjust your philosophy. And you're where you want to be. Questions? Okay, so the decision's required. What if you choose to have a different philosophy?
Linda,
Okay,
Alderman Gold has a question.
Actually, keep going. I'll wait till at the end.
Okay, so here's my concern for you is if you use meeting the highest for uniform and then non-uniform stays where it's at, what rationale will you as a team use to explain the difference in philosophy? If you were just dealing with frontline police officers, given what's going on in the market today, you might have some justification that people will go, yeah, I wouldn't want that job either kind of thing because of what's going on right now in the market. But you want to be ready and prepared with how you're going to explain why you have a different philosophy for these 2 groups. And how comfortable can you be with that? I mean, that's sort of a gut check for each of you. And will you implement using the next highest step, which is what you've done historically, or do you want to adjust to make sure everybody gets at least 3%? So pretty easy decisions here compared with the other group. So, okay, so let's kind of wrap up compensation. For everybody to get a raise, you do need a philosophy change with respect to uniform employees, either meeting the high, giving lump sums, whichever way you want to go about it. All non-uniform or raise eligible, no reason to change there. Moving to the highest maximum approach is a change in philosophy. And that's one that we always suggest. You always have to document, and you have to understand your rationale and how you're going to answer the questions for your constituents in the community, but also for the differences in employee base. Okay, so the questions in that survey that we also had on there is the impact of COVID-19. So what has really happened to your city with respect to compensation? 5 comparators gave no increases in 2020. You saw what happened to some of the ranges. The one comparator who said they didn't increase, but they gave a lump sum merit. Others reported a decrease in their merit budgets. So they had a budget of 3 or 4% and it dropped. Only one reported a furlough, and that was in the recreation staff, obviously with some of the stuff going on. Merit budgets, 1.5 to 3%. A lot of them are still unknown for 2021. A lot of people are fearing 0 for 2021. And one was merit-based on a performance review. Their system is, I would say, in its infancy in terms of truly being what we would consider a merit system, where employees know what expectations are ahead of time and then they're measured against those. So that's kind of what's going on, but even that merit-based budget was in that same range. So that's kind of what you're looking at. Let's pause for a minute and just say, what else can we talk about with respect to compensation that helps get you where you want to be?
And time-wise, we are at the 1 hour for this meeting.
Well, I just assume. I mean, I'm fine to keep going. That's my self-imposed rule. So I guess I'll exercise discretion. But again, I think
Not a problem.
if you know, depending on how the progress we make, I mean, this is an important topic, so we don't get through everything tonight. We'll take it up again. Alderwoman Tice.
So I have a question about, I know probably the harder decisions are about the uniform employees, but I got a little information from Jason, but when I looked through this report, I was sort of shocked that the laborer salary is $27,385 at the minimum. Now, he did explain to me that that's at a 6.5 hour day rather than an 8-hour day, but I just sort of want to highlight that. It's just incredibly low. I know it's not, I mean, if it was a normal full-time, it's just over $13 an hour if it was an 8-hour day, which it isn't, but there aren't comparators there because so few cities do trash, but I want to make,
could I talk about that for just a minute? Because one of the things we do for you is we look at what the one other comparator is paying and how you're paying relative to them. So you've got that information. But more importantly, the reason you only have one comparator is everybody's outsourcing this particular classification.
exactly.
And because they're outsourcing it, we have an enormous amount of data coming through third-party published surveys, because all those companies that other cities are outsourcing to participate in those surveys. And cities still pay more. So as low as that number seems to you, in terms of people that are being outsourced to, that number is still lower in terms of where their average pay is. So anybody would agree with you that that number seems really low compared to how you're paying other people in the city, but it's competitive with the one other comparator who's electing to keep that service. And both cities are significantly above where the market is in terms of those that are being outsourced to.
Okay, thank you.
I had one question. How many of the comparators that you looked at, how many of them are in a philosophy of meeting the highest max and highest minimum? Do you have that data?
You know what, I don't philosophically. I can tell you when I looked at the last full city look, we looked not just at your comparators, but others. You had one city that was sitting out close to St. Charles, and their philosophy really was they monitored when their comparator group changed ranges, and they might adjust ranges based on classification several times over the year in order to always be at least a certain amount above the highest person. That is the only city in this area that I have heard have that type of philosophy. Most use a 75th 60th percentile kind of range. And as you've seen earlier, most also use the standard deviation because it is the best practice. But yeah, I couldn't tell you philosophy because we didn't ask for that for your particular comparator group.
And rationale to adopt that type of philosophy is what? To make sure that our public safety employees, we're retaining and attracting the best quality public safety employees, or could you kind of define?
Yeah, see, I don't.
Rationales?
Yeah, I don't. I think. Yeah, I don't think you could really use that type of rationale for it. I think your rationale has to be, if I were going to promote that type of philosophy, I would be looking at it and saying, this is how I would make sure that I have the highest pay in the market for a particular classification. Right now, I think you could justify that for the classification of police officer, given what's going on right now. I think it's harder to do in fire, yet in my terminology, we would call that white noise. The bigger white noise, I believe, is coming from that particular group with respect to this. So I think you have to decide if you feel like, if it were flashed on a billboard, that's what I always tell my client, if it were flashed on a billboard in your city, would you be comfortable saying, we want to be equal to the highest pay range maximum in our marketplace, in our comparator group? Again, you are one of the best managed cities in the last little tidbits I've read. So best managed cities, I think, can set philosophies at the 75th. You can set them at a lot of different things. I'd want you to be very cautious setting I want to meet the maximum, the highest maximum in the marketplace. I think it's a very, it will be a very expensive long-term philosophy. And you don't have the recruitment issues you have, and probably will, at least for the foreseeable future, are really entry-level police officers. And yet this strategy only addresses the top end of that. And so I think I would want you to be really cautious. My strong recommendation to you would be to keep the 75th, move to the 85th. Either one of those I think you could support pretty easily. And then probably more than anything, hopefully Bola will get a positive response when she goes back to your city attorney, because that's really the way to acknowledge, we're glad you're still here. We're not going to add to your base, but here's a lump sum check. Now, some people are not comfortable giving all of that at once. And so they actually give it in 6 months. They give 2 payments at 6-month intervals. We always say you get bigger bang for your buck. Give them 1 check once a year as a lump sum merit. And most of our clients follow that. But I would certainly advise my clients to do that before I would advise them to be the highest payer in the marketplace. Unless you have a reason, which is generally based on your culture internally that makes it difficult for you to hang on to people, then you might need to be the highest payer to hang on to people. But we don't see that in your data at all. People who come to Brentwood generally stay at Brentwood. Jason, do you disagree with that? Am I seeing anything wrong?
Sorry, I had to unmute. No, I think what you kind of indicated is accurate.
Can I throw something else in the pile here?
Sure.
We are considering simply salaries at this for comparators. We're not considering a total package of benefits and salaries. I don't know if we've ever asked that it be done, but the total salary is not the total. And Jason could probably give, what is it, a 12% addition for benefits? I don't know what the figure is.
It actually varies from individual to individual depending on what kind of coverage they have. But starting about 2 years ago, I had given out an annual benefits sheet to each and every employee that put a dollar figure on the benefits package in addition to what their base salary was, so that the employees actually do have that in front of them. And I can attest that when I go through new hire paperwork with every full-time employee, which I do all of those personally, I go through the cost of the benefits as well, so that they are well aware, even though they don't pay for those benefits, that those are factored into what their compensation package is.
What would be the, Jason, the minimum package that someone would get?
If you give me just a minute, I can tell you.
Just ballpark figure.
Probably about $11,000 to $12,000 a year.
So
I mean, right off the bat, you're looking at about $3,000 for the health coverage, and that's if they have single-only coverage. In addition to that, you're probably another $700 to $800 for the dental benefits, $500 for vision, life, AD&D. All of those are probably somewhere in the ballpark of about $700 to $800, and then the pension varies between police and fire and the non-uniformed individuals. That is anywhere from 6% on the high end to about 5% of the salary, and then there are other incidental benefits like uniforms and cell phones and vehicles and things like that for different classifications of employees.
So part of the presentation also
Jason,
includes a benefit survey report that Linda can
Yeah.
present.
Right, but that's not what I'm asking.
yeah,
Yes.
okay. Alderman O'Neill, one of the reasons we used to try to look at total rewards, which is basically trying to combine those two pieces. And the reason we moved away from that is because it's very, the data is fungible. Some people, when you ask for that information on a survey, are going to throw in statutory benefits, which are pretty easy. We know what statutory benefits run. That's the legally required stuff you have to pull out of a paycheck. But when you start valuing the additional benefits, much like what Jason was alluding to, if I have, 6 kids and 3 problems and whatever, that benefit package looks and feels differently for me than it does for somebody who is single and would rather have whatever. So that was one part of it. The second part is when we look at attraction and retention, nobody changes jobs for benefits. Now, if you're trying to recruit somebody 50 and older, they might actually look at your benefit package before they jumped in. They're looking at pay. So when we look at pay, it really does need to stand alone. And then we come back in behind it, which is what you're going to see, and look at benefits so that you're rolling the two packages together. Historically, what we found, not just for Brentwood, but for other cities, is that because most of the council has worked in industry, you look at city benefits and you go, wow, these are phenomenal. And they are, but they're also phenomenal at other cities. So cities have comparable benefit packages. And that's one of the things you're going to see as we go through benefits is you could value it, but by and large, it's going to be a wash in most areas. And in some areas, we're going to show you where you're low or where you might be a little bit high. But we didn't see when we look at benefits, either in 2014 or this year, that Brentwood is doing anything excessive in the term of benefits. So you're not going to make up any pay problems, if you will, in terms of shortages by looking at your benefits.
Okay, but we can,
So that's why we moved away from that.
we can also assume that the person who's earning $35,000 a year is adding another $10,000 in benefits, perhaps.
Ballpark, yes.
So, okay, that makes me feel better about the bottom end of the range. I understand why it's not included, but I think that's fine. Thank you. We'll stop there.
Okay.
Chairman Sims.
Other questions on the compensation?
Chairman.
I have a question. I don't know if I'm going to be able to articulate this well, so give me a little rope. But the issue with in particular, the fire department, I struggle with, we have a 75% percentile philosophy, but it just appears that when we apply it, we're really only comparing ourselves with, 4 other cities, because the fire protection cities come out of the mix outright, and then we take out the top 2 and the bottom 2, and so that whittles down. So it seems like in practice we're not really in the 75th percentile. Is there anything that can be done to work on that formula? I mean, I want to be consistent with the philosophy, but it seems like we are, if we're treating a different animal the same, and that's also not getting a good result. I'm struggling with how that's shaking out in particular for fire.
Well, remember that just because it's best practice doesn't mean that you have to follow it. And that's why we put in that slide. Darren, can you get back there very quickly? Where we wanted you to see the difference. If you apply the standard deviation or don't, and we use that particular job as an example, it's basically $1,000 difference. It's not huge. If you don't want to follow it, you don't have to use standard deviation. And if that takes that white noise, if you will, off the table, go that way. The probability you're going to be challenged on your ranges is probably pretty slim. So I'm not sure you really have to worry about that. Some of our clients do. They're a little more out in the visible. They have a lot more visibility around their ranges. But see, this is why we did this exactly, because we had heard that question come up from you, not from you personally, but we had heard that question from Brentwood before. So that's why we looked at it and said, when we're looking at that firefighter paramedic, for example, it's getting a $4,000 jump if you go with a standard deviation model, which is the best practice. But that only goes up to $5,000 difference if you throw out the 75th percentile, and then you don't have 4 matches, you have 8 or 10 or however many there are. So the number of matches jump up. That's also why when we were talking about the firefighter EMT, it doesn't matter how many cities you have, you're not going to have more matches than that. I think that's part of it. And when you look at your recruitment range, even if you wanted to look at firefighter paramedic, who are you going to put in there? You don't recruit from fire districts. You don't traditionally lose people to fire districts. So you would want to be able to go out, and I don't have a rationale for you doing that, to cities like St. Charles, O'Fallon, that kind of area to pick up additional matches.
Sorry, could you say that again? There was some interference.
Sorry.
Okay. In order to go with a greater number of comparators, which is really what you are talking about doing, you'd have to go out and pick up people like St. Charles, O'Fallon, some of the people out in that general neck of the woods. Some pay higher than you, some pay lower than you. But when you look at that, the question is, what would your rationale be? You don't lose people. It's the same thing with fire districts. You don't lose people to them, and you don't recruit from them. So what would be your rationale for including them? I think we have, is it 8, Darren, matches if we don't use the standard deviation, and it adjusts your range by basically $1,000. And in some years, that number is less than rather than more than. Like when we first looked at this back in 2014, I think it was, the question came up and you decided to stick with the standard deviation because so many of them were lower. And so a lot of the low ones were getting kicked out. Again, you can make that call. You don't have to follow standard deviation just because it's the best practice.
The reason it's
But when you look at some of the fire districts, when we looked at them, they were significantly above even where your highest city is. So again, how would you explain to your whoever that I don't recruit from there, I don't lose people to there unless they're on a legacy list? How would you rationalize fire districts or a St. Charles, for example? Which should, the last time I looked at their data, probably would bump your numbers if they didn't get kicked out with a standard deviation.
Were there other, it appeared as though, Kelly, at some point were you trying to get my attention are there other questions?
There's a hand raised from Alderman Lockmiller.
Okay, Alderman Lockmiller, I'll recognize you.
Am I unmuted?
You are.
All right. Thank you, Chairwoman. I have a question for Linda. Linda, I was around back there in 2014 when we started all this. And I remember we were looking at uniformed and non-uniformed all being under the 12th step. And then I believe, and Bo, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the chiefs at that time wanted uniform to go to the 7th step. And I'm just wondering if because is that exacerbating the problem by having a 7th step even though we try to change this philosophy, down the road, we're always going to be backed into this corner based on the shorter step?
You certainly have a shorter time frame than some of your comparators. We are still seeing, and we did check this year, the number of steps as well as the number of comparators using steps. 7 is still the most popular. You have 7, 9, and then you've got a couple of outliers that have like 15 steps, for example. So because you're at 7 and that's sort of on the shorter end, your people are always going to bump the top faster. But a part of that initial discussion was the fact that you already had so many people, incumbents, already at that point. And so when we were trying to stretch it, it was sort of like, what does that do? You know, because you had people with high service that were already at that max. So again, what we looked at was what was the most common number of steps, which is why they settled on 7, which is pretty, if you look nationwide at fire departments, 7 is a pretty common way to do it. Within your area, you have more people onto sort of a combination. They're not always doing steps. Although when we look at the ones that aren't doing steps, they're administering their raise program as across the board raises. So they're just giving, 3% to everybody, which in effect is having a step, right? Because if I started at 20,000 and somebody else was already at 40, it in effect is a step. It's just giving people 3% across the board. But your 7 steps certainly gets you into, I can't get a raise this year faster than those folks who have 9 or 12 steps. But it was a pretty ardent discussion earlier, you're right.
Yeah. And so no matter what philosophy we try here, we're always going to be backed into that corner, right? I mean, this may solve a problem this year, but then it just comes back again following years.
Correct. The only thing that will solve this problem over time is that lump sum merit that is so popular both in industry and with other cities. Right. That's the real solution to everybody gets a raise every year a raise is given. It doesn't help the people at the top any more than it helps the other people if you get to a point where you've got a 0 increase year. But at least it gets you around the hurdle of, I haven't gotten a raise in 4 years. That's still going to be a true statement, by the way. But your comeback then is, yes, but we've acknowledged your additional service by giving you a lump sum merit.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you, Linda.
Sure. Any other questions on
Just as a point of
compensation?
clarification for everybody, so the lump sum merit, you really can't, you don't call it a raise, right? Because it doesn't change your base. It doesn't.
That's correct.
Continue. I mean,
it does not continue,
but it's valuable for those people, but not a guaranteed increase to their base year over year.
Yes. The other thing to keep in mind is that the reason people shifted to lump sum merit is, first of all, you do want to reward people who continue to perform even when they hit the top of the range. So that was the first part. But the second part was when you looked at the contribution that people were making, you want to make sure you acknowledge it. But when people looked at how their pension plans were set up, how their life insurance stuff was done, that kind of thing, it also saved money there because that was based on your base rate of pay, not your W-2 earnings. So that's the other piece that kind of comes into play with that.
Thank you for clarifying.
And Bola,
other compensation questions?
Are this lump sum payment, I'll confess this is the first time I'm hearing about this. We're looking into that? I mean, is that a fair statement?
I just sent an email for clarification to Kevin O'Keefe. And also, I didn't mention this when I was talking earlier about the American Rescue Plan Act. We're getting more and more comfortable with this. And I'm going to read a section in the eligible expenditures for you. So it says, to respond to workers performing essential work during the COVID-19 public health emergency by providing premium pay to eligible workers of the metropolitan city, non-entitlement unit of local government. So it's giving the categories of entities who would have eligible workers that you can give premium pay to. So in talking to Kevin yesterday, I said, so eligible workers would be all city employees. And he said, no, just public safety. So if, between 1.4 and 1.7 million, that the city now has to decide how it spends it in accordance with, requirements, and restrictions. I think you do have an opportunity to consider, if you want to acknowledge, outside of this, if you want to acknowledge all the work that our public safety have done over the past year.
Okay, thank you.
Bola, did he also, he was okay with the premium pay being in a lump sum form?
Well, this is new, so we're still attending webinars to try to understand
Okay,
exactly how we would roll this out. So we're not certain at this point.
okay. Okay, just checking. Any other questions, or are we ready to move on to benefits?
I'm not able to tell. Are there other questions? I know we covered Alderman, or is anyone else in the?
There are no hands are raised at this point.
Okay, then I guess let's move on to benefits.
Let's move on to benefits. Again, we look at benefits in some very specific areas of benefits. And I promise we can roll through this pretty quickly because everybody completed the survey again. Again, I can't tell you how awesome that is to get everybody completing your survey. And my thanks to Bola and Jason, who were able to nudge a couple of people who were slow in getting their surveys back. Overall, you're at a competitive benefits package, and that's what I was explaining with Ms. O'Neill's question, is that by and large, cities offer the same package of benefits. You've got a few that high or low kind of thing, but they're pretty much there together. You're competitive and average on things like medical costs, dental costs, vision, short-term disability, your holidays, your tuition reimbursement. So all of those things are sort of in that competitive range. You're neither high nor low. So when we look at the benefit area, you're equal on those number of medical plans, your deductibles, you're equal to better on the employee-only side. Again, so we want you to kind of look at the detail inside this. And what we really want to do in benefit surveys is to see if there are areas where we think you need to scratch a little deeper because you're not as competitive as we might like you to be, or where you might be able to fund something where you're low because you're a little above the market in some of the others. Your out-of-pocket maximums, 8 people are right along with you, 5 of them are lower than you are in terms of out-of-pocket. Monthly costs are better than people, lower than average for both employee and family. You're with the majority in so many of these others. The one question that I heard on one of the calls I was in earlier this year was on Slate, and you're with the majority. You have 3 comparators who don't use Slate. So you're right in the sweet spot, if you will, with what your comparator group is doing for benefits. Domestic partner was a specific question we were asked. 50% cover, 50% don't. So again, you're right in the middle. You don't cover it, but half of your comparators don't either. Dental, again, right in that same piece. Vision, you're a little better because 2 comparators don't offer vision. Life insurance, again, most people use multiples of pay. Most 6 use 2 times, so you've got 1 times or 2 times pay. There is an upper cap on it, so when you get some people who earn a whole bunch of money, then that is capped by 4 people at least, because they have people who hit that. And 3 have different coverage on life insurance for uniformed employees. Short-term disability, you're better because 6 comparators match coverage but require a contribution. You don't require a contribution. Long-term disability, you're equal to everybody else. Tuition reimbursement, you're equal to your comparator group. So again, you don't have a lot of give in those benefits in terms of where you're over with everybody else. Retirement is a little trickier to evaluate when you look at how people perceive loggers. And indeed, in a couple of cases, we had to go back multiple times and finally get to the finance person who really understood how their retirement package worked. You're with the majority. 9 comparators use loggers. The levels vary amongst all of those 9. And 6 of those comparators allow employees to contribute. The 457 plan, all comparators offer it, but only 2 match the contributions. And those 2 comparators, if I recall correctly, are people who do not use loggers. So again, you've got that trade-off going on. Retirement eligibility in that rule of 80, 10 comparators have no rule of 80, so they're not trying to make you hit a particular one. Eligibility at 55 for uniform and 60 for non-uniform. So again, the eligibility piece, you're pretty much in that sweet spot. There's nothing, you don't have a lot of give in some of these areas is really the point. I'm going to talk about some areas where I'd like to see you do something different. And some of this we talked about in 2014 as well. Benefits change slowly, especially within cities and within comparator groups. The key piece that we saw, again, combined PTO, one person says they really have PTO and they try to do combine all the plans. If you were working in industry, I might be sort of trying to nudge you this direction, but it's really a unique city that has a true PTO plan where you combine vacation, holiday, sick, all into one bucket of time off, if you will. Vacation, the one piece I'd really like you to look at, right now, you do not allow people during their first year to take any vacation. There's no paid vacation. That really isn't competitive with cities. It's not competitive with industry. Even if you do it on an accrual basis, so I could only take, 1 week over the first 6 months and 1 week after that, whatever, so that employees, new hires, would have some opportunity for vacation. If we look beyond that 1 year piece, you're with the majority. And for people who hang around 25 years, you're equal or better than the rest of your comparator group. Some do provide more for fire, or it kind of looks like they do, but again, with those fire schedules at some locations, that's a little different. Excuse me. With sick pay, same thing, you're equal. There's nothing going on there. Holidays, you're a little better than other people in terms of the number you give. Time off bank, you're a little lower in terms of how that bank works. But 10 competitors have a higher time off bank in terms of how much they'll allow you to accrue. Vacation, a little lower. Again, you've got that 1 year kind of issue. And that most people allow some type of carryover. It's usually not a lot, and it's a pretty narrow window, but there's some carryover. Vacation cash out, you're with the majority. Basically, people can cash out, but it's more a function of, are you retiring? Am I letting you go? That kind of thing. Sick cash out, again, you're with the majority. They don't have a sick cash out, or they have a grandfathered option that's in place until somebody retires. So benefit highlights overall, competitive package, 78% use slate. So again, when that question came up, you're right in the sweet spot there. Only one other comparator does not require employees to pay a portion of the premium for healthcare. So again, if you've got any give here at all, or anything where you're a little higher than everybody else, most people have started requiring, probably 10, 15 years ago even, employees to pay something for benefits, some portion of that premium. HDHP or high deductible plans are growing in strength, sometimes added as an option if you're going to start requiring contributions and you haven't in the past. So again, it's more of a strategy kind of item. We also saw somebody do something really unique when they decided to put in an HDHP plan, but then they basically funded that by giving employees that much into their HSA. So in effect, it's doing what you're doing, they're just doing it a little differently in order to have less on the premium side. 93% of comparators allow new hires to take paid vacation. So once again, of all the things that you have that I would say make you non-competitive, and attraction is going to continue to be an issue for you in some categories, like police officer, for example, you want to make sure that you look at, or at least seriously consider, allowing new hires, even if you do it on an accrual basis, to take some level of vacation during the first year. All right, so here we go. I promised you this section would be faster. Compensation, got to make a conscious decision on pay philosophy. Based on our discussion tonight and at least some openness with the folks on the call tonight, I would probably add back in my consider lump sum merits as a recommendation. Confirm that you really do want two distinct pay philosophies, if that's the direction you're going to go, and really think through what your rationale is and what the long-term implications are for that. and continue to not give raises for those who are above the range maximum. So as painful as it's been for firefighter EMTs not to get raises, as you just saw from the data, even if you use the highest range in the marketplace, they're still $2,000 above. So they're very highly compensated for that particular classification. Benefits, consider giving vacation, that's gonna be it. If you wanna be in the sweet spot, you're gonna shift to a multiple of pay. A little tougher to administer sometimes, but again, the younger your population is, you may find that it's actually cost effective. But that's an easy project for Jason to run and come back to you and say, hey, it's not worth the time, or it is.
I'm already working
and then
on
I
that.
would say consider, already working on that one, okay. Consider transition options that require employees to pay a portion of their health insurance costs to align with your comparators. So that's really the biggie on the recommendation side. Let's talk about what you have to do next. Yes, Alderman Gould.
I just have one question as it relates to PTO, type of philosophies. And I know one of the big shifts in the past couple of years in the industry or corporate world is moving toward a unlimited PTO kind of policy. Whereas there are no sick days or vacation days. You have an unlimited use of them, but you use them based on your need. And I'm curious on your philosophy on that as it relates to municipalities, and some of the benefits of that is that a lot of people end up not taking as much as they thought they would because they're just kind of in it, and so it's not a detriment to the business. But curious on your philosophy on that as it relates to municipalities.
We don't see many municipalities doing that at all for a whole host of reasons. Where that is gaining speed and popularity is in the tech world. And it's really interesting because as they look at differentiating who does have unlimited and who doesn't, they generally are initially implemented with those who are managers going to unlimited, and those who are hourly are staying on traditional plans. So you really have to dig in to see who's really in an unlimited plan. Unlimited plans across the board that we see are primarily in financial institutions like investment houses, where 90% of the people are exempt from overtime, and in the tech world, where you get a lot of sabbaticals and that kind of stuff going on as well. We don't see any growth in this area in cities at all, municipalities. And a part of it is that it would be such a significant change that I think people would really shy away from that. They're a little more conservative in terms of what they have. And even now, when you look at the generic benefit surveys that cross all industries, you see that in less than 5% of the companies in surveys.
That's what I expected. I just wanted to see your reaction to that.
Yeah. Sorry, I wish I liked the idea. It's just not practical for a lot of companies, unfortunately. Let's talk a little bit about next steps. You have to decide on that pay philosophy. Are you going to do it or aren't you? Do you want to switch it? What do you want to do? What can you afford to do? Not just short term. Because right now, a lot of cities in your comparator group, you're in good shape financially in terms of what you could afford to do probably. But you have to think long term. Is it the right message to send to your community? Is it the right message to send to employees? Is that really where you want to be? And then if it is, you have to decide how you're going to communicate that. How do you really make that sort of philosophy change? And from my perspective, and this may play into the money that Bola was talking about, is when are you going to implement this? Our data was run as a snapshot in time of what the cost would be. So you could retro everything to January 1st of 21, obviously. You could just say, we're going to implement in July because it'll take us that long to run all the pieces and parts and be ready to go. You could push it out to January of 22, but if you do, these numbers could change on you because some cities will look at their pay ranges and may indeed modify them on the go forward basis. So if indeed you're going to push it out to 22 before you implement, I would ask you to build into your budget an update number so that you could at least go back out based on the philosophy you pick and see how many of those cities have actually adjusted their ranges. if you're not going to implement until 2022. And then obviously this is more of a Jason reminder here that you have to update your classification system because the titling has to tie with between your payroll system and your job description system. Questions for me, because that's it, I think, right? Where do you want to go from here?
Well, you've left us speechless.
I don't often do that.
Apparently.
Could we unshare the screen?
Yeah. Can we go back to the Brady Bunch view?
Okay.
I'm not in a position to pick one. I mean, next steps. I'm not even, in terms of a philosophy and can we afford it and developing options. I mean, I'm in no way prepared to. You've given us a lot to digest, and so a very comprehensive report. But in terms of, your recommendations of next steps, it seems like we need to noodle on that more. Alderwoman O'Neill.
There's a question here that you brought up, Linda, about long-term commitment. We've weathered the COVID stay-at-home quite much better than we thought we would. However, the brick and mortar store may not stay around, and in 4 or 5 years, we may not be in a position as we are now. So I think this is an area I hadn't thought of, that whatever we do that moves this whole schedule to higher costs to the city may sound fine for the next year or two, but 4 or 5 years from now, this could be an issue, and I hadn't thought about that. I don't know about the rest of you.
I think you raised a good point. Bola, in terms of, mapping this out, I mean, I'm open, I'm spitballing here. I mean, would it make sense to run budget scenarios on these options? And I think what I'm hearing from the questions, and maybe evaluating some kind of lump sum payment schedule, so we can factor in ability to pay and in our philosophy. I'm not ready to choose one way or the other tonight. So Alderman Gould, but I'm certainly open to your suggestion. Alderman Gould, you're muted.
Yeah, I know I'm muted. The space bar wasn't working. I'm in agreement with you. I think we need to know what that what the possibilities are for the lump sum payment, because I struggle with making massive decisions like this, because there's a minority of people at the top end that we need to try to figure out how to demonstrate that we appreciate them and compensate them and all that, to massively shift to a maximum and a minimums kind of thing is pretty drastic in my opinion. And so I'd love to be able to see what plays out with that, but then I'd also like to consider, do we consider bumping to an 85th percentile or something like that, just to demonstrate that we want to be competitive, always remain competitive as a city, but I'm not there to make a decision yet, for sure. I'd like to see more analysis, I guess is what I'm saying.
Alderwoman Tice.
Yeah, I would echo what everyone said, especially the lump sum piece. And I'll just put on the record that I would, as we look at benefits, we may need to make some changes on the payment pieces, but I would really like to see us do something with that first year vacation to make a change there. Because certainly for recruitment, that seems
Thank
like it
you.
would be really beneficial to help us recruit people.
So that might be the first easy solution for
I like easy.
committee.
Yeah.
So if you want to discuss that further, or if you think there's some sort of consensus on that, I take that as a motion. Is there a second?
Yeah, I'd second
We
that.
have a 2-hour presentation, a comprehensive presentation of it, and the only thing we can get is vacation in the first year of employment.
Yeah.
We
Come,
are
leave it to me to come up with the
committee
easy,
doers.
easy, agreeable
If that
one
was a
solution.
motion- Yeah, if that was a motion for Jason to put together a proposal for first year employees, then I will second that.
Is this accrual basis?
What I will more than likely do is I'll put together a couple of different options for you in a memo format. It won't be as big a number as you may think it is, primarily because we don't have a significant amount of turnover amongst our full-time employees. So it may be more manageable than you may be thinking it will be. The other piece that I'm looking at Linda's initial suggestion is I'd reached out to Lincoln, which is the company that provides life insurance, long-term and short-term, and AD&D, about potentially switching from the flat 50,000 life and AD&D to a multiple of salary capping at about 150, which would probably ballpark be an increase of about $20,000 a year. But again, you'd be having a significant number of employees see a very large increase to potential benefits to them.
So those two are, I think, a good takeaway from the meeting tonight. I know that Jason and I talked about this, and he, as he said, had been working on it. So, more and more employees, at least at the supervisory level, that we bring in, who have substantial years of experience in other entities, come in, and then they hear our vacation policy, and then they negotiate, to be able to, take whatever days off in the first year. So I think that's a good recruitment effort for the city to adopt. And then Jason can come back with recommendation on, life insurance caps. And of course, we would run whatever the policy language is for the vacation by McMahon Berger, and then bring that to you. So my approach to taking this in steps, then you have asked us to take a look at other things, get a legal opinion from Kevin O'Keefe to see the impact of the lump sum. What does that look like? And Jason will help in that regard. So I believe that there are still pockets of money associated with this contract that maybe we could go back and ask Linda to take a look at what the 85th percentile would look like, and Jason would help in terms of determining the cost. So that kind of wraps up 1, 2, 3, 4. So obviously, this committee has taken on a lot this year. Thanks to Chair Sims, we've had, and you all, and being accommodating of the schedule, we've had to have more special meetings. So I would envision more special meetings in the month of April, because there's still the insurance discussion to tackle, and then there's this American Rescue Plan. So we have a meeting coming up, April, not sure what day that is.
April 1st.
April 1st. So I don't know what we will have ready by that date. I think we might have the vacation piece ready, but we can wait and see what we can bring to you all, at least to start more discussions. But I think that would be a first step as you all discuss and navigate your way through all the different items.
I will not be there.
We could start later. Will you have landed by then?
I will be in the car with a grandchild and an Easter bunny. I don't think it's going to do.
I mean, I think the committee has always been open to changing the meeting date. So that's another option if you feel you absolutely want to be part of the discussion.
Oh.
I mean,
Ola, I think,
I'm open to it.
Yes, Linda.
sorry. I think Darren and I can certainly by April 1st supply you with what the 85th looks like. I'd like a little more guidance on, are you thinking about sort of kicking out the standard deviation? Because that way it just saves a little, you don't go quite as blind looking at all the different numbers on the sheet. But we can do the 85th by the 1st for you.
So Linda's looking for committee feedback on standard deviation and best practice, or do you want to see both or one or the other?
Well, it's the, can we see both?
Sure.
I mean, I don't know. I have, math is not a strong suit for me, but I have fielded questions about standard deviation and using it, not using it. I'd rather just sort of, as you did today, very well, put it up on the board and let's walk us through what those two scenarios look like, and then let the math speak for itself. In terms of meeting times, I'm open to moving. I mean, if pushing it out, perhaps to the 8th might give people more time.
Well, the 8th is Public Works.
Okay, never mind. So maybe my recollection was that we were going to be taking up the financial issues about slate on the 1st, and I feel like that might be a meaty subject. So to cover two, I don't have the bandwidth, frankly. I'll just maybe we put that off to another. I mean, but I want to be accommodating.
I think you want to kind of tackle one and complete it.
Yeah.
Taking on another.
That's my prerogative. Yes. So why don't we maybe, perhaps look to, I mean, I don't want to bog everybody down with all these special meetings in the month of April, but maybe later on in April, we might be able to revisit some of these issues again. Because it's certainly, it's the biggest part of our budget and it's an important topic. Would that be
stay fresh in your mind as well, so that we're not having to start
the retread? I mean, do you want to see how far we get on the 1st? What tell me, I don't want to be how does the committee feel about how to proceed scheduling wise?
So Bola, are you suggesting we wait on slate and stay focused on the salary?
Yes.
Piece? Okay.
Oh, okay. That's great. Let's do that.
Linda, as the consultant, is being compensated.
Oh yeah.
The slate. You
put that off. Yeah, no, I didn't consider that version. So yeah, great. Thank you. Teamwork makes the dream work. So we'll keep it on the 1st.
Can I ask a quick question of Alderman O'Neill? Since you aren't available on the 1st, is it possible that you get back to Bola or Jason or Alderwoman Sims and let us know of any specific questions, things you want to make sure that get covered? Obviously, you'll have a copy of whatever we're talking about that night, but in advance, if there's something you want to make sure is in there, let us know so that we can cover it.
No, I think the only thing I'd share is that as a former teacher, I was in 2 different school systems, one with a merit pay, one with a step. And I relate to this top of the schedule because in both cities, people were well paid, but stayed long enough to hit the top of the schedule. And I don't think complaining about it is a problem, because if you're at the top of the schedule, you are paid well. I like the lump sum as a merit, but I can't see changing philosophy to accommodate a few individuals who are at the top. I think my personal preference would be to have the same, maybe 85th for all, but not one schedule for one and one for the other. So that's the only thing that I would share at this point.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Alderwoman O'Neill. Does that give you the direction you need?
Absolutely.
Do we need do you need a motion, or we're good? Okay.
Can I ask you one quick clarification based on what Alderwoman O'Neill just indicated? Alderwoman O'Neill, you indicated 85th percentile across the board for all. Would that include the non-uniform? Because that would be an additional piece that Linda had not done prior. Were you looking for that?
I think what's fair for one is fair for all. Whatever the committee decides to go with, I don't think there should be one standard for uniform and one for another.
So I guess if I'm hearing you, Jason, correctly, are you asking that should we run the 85% analysis on the non-uniform?
Yes.
Is that-
I heard that, and I wanted to clarify that that was what Alderwoman O'Neill's intent was, and to see if the remainder of the committee members felt the same way, because obviously there's some work associated with that, and I want to make sure that Linda and her team has enough time to complete that, if that's the direction you wanted to go.
Alderwoman O'Neill, is that what you were asking?
That's what I'd like. I don't know what the rest of the committee feels.
Alderman Gould?
Yeah, when I originally suggested the 85 being a potential that we might want to even look at, I had assumed based on Linda's recommendation or caution, I guess, of having two totally different policies, I assume that would have been uniform across or consistent across both uniform and non-uniform. So Linda, is that what you were agreeing to being able to run as 85 percentile across both?
Yes, and we will go back and, we had sent you a first draft of a report. We can go back and modify the report and just put in there that we did present this other alternative and it was declined. But we can certainly do that. I mean, again, the numbers are already in. And so we have your data. So then it's just a matter of, Darren gets to replug the numbers to calculate the 85th and then make sure every employee is placed in the right spot. So yes, we can do that. I just want to be clear on what you want from us on the first. Are we only going to be looking at the 85th? Are we going to be revisiting? Obviously, it sounds to me like we're going to be revisiting standard deviation, yes or no, looking at the 75th and the 85th, but not the other piece. So we've got from my perspective, a pretty small agenda to get through that night. Am I understanding correctly? And then I think your decision, hopefully BOLA will have one by then on, can we even consider lump sums? Because that, I think, really begins to address the first part of what you're trying to do, is just to put some amount of money in somebody's hands.
I hope to have a response from Kevin O'Keefe, hopefully by the weekend, so you'll have it in ample time if I don't have it by tomorrow. So I think there needs to be clarification about what you're really doing, because I thought it was just the 85th percentile for all, uniform, non-uniform, standard deviation, non-standard deviation, but I heard you just say 75th percentile as well. You've already presented that information. Right?
Yeah, so it's just the comparison between the two for the group. That's what I meant. So we're going to be comparing those two and looking at lump sum. So again, hopefully it would be a shorter time out of your evening. Sorry. That's all. Yes, Nan. Sorry. Alderman Tice.
Oh, Alderman Tice.
Oh, thanks. I was waiting for Alderman Sims. So I think that's great. I look forward to hearing about the lump sum. The lost my train of thought now that I was called on by someone I wasn't expecting to be called on by. So it's clearly we've been sitting here too long because I can't. Oh, my thought on the standard deviation. I actually think that's probably a reasonable philosophy if there are enough comparator jobs in a classification. But I think the question that Sunny asked earlier about positions where there aren't very many comparators, I mean, does it make sense to use it for some jobs and not for other jobs, or do you just need to either use the standard deviation or not use the standard deviation?
Philosophically, you either need to use it or not use it. And we already have a sort of a built-in, if we don't have at least 3 matches after the standard deviation, it's considered a non-match, and you have to make an internal decision on where that position goes. So the fact that there's 4 after standard deviations or 5 or 6 is, again, we've already set a minimum, and that minimum is kind of, again, a best practice or standard, which is you're looking at jobs that match, but we want at least 3. And if one of those is an outlier, then we don't consider it a match. So we can certainly look at it both ways for you, but philosophically, you need to decide which way you're going to go. And I think, again, there's enough angst around the question that I can't advise you to go without a standard deviation because that's best practice. But as a group, you can look at your city and say, you know what, the difference between the two isn't significant enough not to use a straight average rather than using the standard deviation. I mean, we've shown you in probably one of your most vocal groups that the difference between using it and not using it, at least for this year's data, is $1,000 over 10 people, I think, that's in it. It's in that classification.
That's great. Well, you answered my question about the number of people you put in that category, so that was helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Alderman Gould.
I mean, if you're looking for guidance from any of us, as far as I'm concerned, I think you should follow best practices. And if that means, keeping standard deviation in, then that's kind of what I would recommend. But
You all will get to decide and discuss that more next week. But she will present that information for you, unless you want to vote on that tonight.
I'm inclined, let's just put the numbers on the board. And I don't disagree with you, Alderman Gould, but I'd rather just say we did it and we can look at it all together. That's my thought. So did we cover the topics? Are we good on direction? Are there other things that we should circle back on?
I'm clear. Linda,
Okay.
Jason, are you all clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Linda, for a very comprehensive report. Thank you, everyone, for staying with us. I guess if there aren't any other issues to cover, we'll move on. And I think we can make short work of it. Item 6, there are no department reports. Item 7 is the consent agenda, the approval of the minutes. So everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes that were attached to the consent agenda. Any objection to approving that by acclamation? All right, seeing none, it'll be approved. Are there any, item number 8, citizen comments? Any members of the citizenry who would like to come forward? I'm seeing a nod no. So
No hands raised. Nope.
so we'll move on from there. And then finally, Chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for sticking with us. I think we covered a lot of ground tonight, so I really appreciate the time. We'll see you next Thursday.
Good night.
Thank you.
Have fun. Have fun in Colorado.
Yeah, have a
Is it
great
Colorado,
time,
Kathy? Yeah, have a great.
Learning to talk. It should be fun.
Oh, have a great trip.
Yeah.
Bye.